Welcome to the 2023-2024 college football preview and breakdown show. As me and Jackson Johnson of the Jacksonian are to preview and break down the four playoff matchups between Alabama, Michigan, Texas, Washington in the Rose Bowl and the All-State Sugar Bowl. And we're going to talk all things about these games, talk all things surrounding them, go over their schedules, talk about how they got to this point, talk about some key players and key matchups to watch for, the head coaching matchups, and all things about this. But I cannot do this without my co-host, the guy that's been here with me the whole way during bowl season, my good partner, Jackson. How you doing tonight, my friend, and how's bowl season treating you?
I'm doing pretty good, Austin. Bowl season's going pretty good so far. I mean, I love that little comeback that I saw from Western Kentucky. Sorry, I don't know why I said Western Michigan, but I love that comeback so much that I was mixing up names. I shouldn't be doing that. That's a bad Jackson.
It's all right. We all make mistakes. It's all good. But we're here now. We're here to talk some playoffs. You know, obviously, we got a lot of great bowl games left. We're 2 weeks out from the playoffs from January 1st on Monday. Should be fun. New Year's 6 is coming around the corner as well. These should all be interesting. But I'm looking forward to these. Jackson, which game are you looking forward to the most before we get into them? Me personally, Alabama, Michigan is probably the game I'm looking forward to the most, just to see if Michigan can hang with arguably the GOAT of head coaching, Nick Saban and his Crimson Tide.
I mean, the granddaddy of them all is awesome. But I'm also really looking forward to the Sugar Bowl, the quarterback battle between Michael Penix and Quinn Ewers. That's going to be tremendous right there, and we'll definitely be diving more into the backstory of Steve Sarkisian right after we discuss the granddaddy of them all.
Yes, we are going to start with the 2023-2024 Rose Bowl and talk about Michigan versus Alabama, the 1 versus the 4. It'll be 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Central Time, Central Time, and it'll be in Pasadena, California. This is what everyone dreams of. This is the stuff of legends. We all remember some Rose Bowl games somewhere down the road in our life. Like the most memorable one for me in recent memory was when Oregon beat Florida State in 2014. Marcus Mariota went up and down the field on that Seminoles defense. Jackson, before we get into this, do you have any fond memories of this glorious game of the Rose Bowl?
Oh my God, I got a ton of them. I mean, the 2011 Rose Bowl between TCU and Wisconsin, that's one of my favorite Rose Bowls right there. The 1926 Rose Bowl between Alabama, Washington, the game that changed the South forever, is one of my favorites as well, because hint, it was the game that really started the Alabama Crimson Tide. It's what they're known for now, a blue blood. And as a matter of fact, they were the first ever team from the South to ever play in a Rose Bowl. So that's tremendous right there in of itself.
Yes, it is, Jackson.
But I have another one, ahead, if you like to hear one. The 2014 Rose Bowl between Michigan State and Stanford. I mean, that game was a tremendous dogfight right there. I mean, that was a dogfight.
Those are all some wonderful memory Rose Bowls for sure. And let's go make some new ones, shall we? And Jackson, Let's start with the Michigan side of things. They went 13-0. They ran the Big Ten gauntlet. They're the number 1 team in all the land. But there's some controversy surrounding Michigan of, are they stealing signs? Are they not? Kind of A lot of people were thinking Michigan, if they win this game, it could get taken from them. They win it all, it could get taken from them, and it kind of has put a deflation on their season because many people are hoping for their downfall. But Michigan has stayed upright as of far, and they've been able to beat all the allegations, especially with Jim Harbaugh getting suspended for those 3 games. But, you know, we try not to focus on that as much. But, Jackson, that is a big storyline in this game for sure. Just talk about that just for a minute. We don't want to spend too much time on it, take away from this game. But talk about how that has been looming over Michigan's season and maybe could affect what happens in this game.
Like, I don't think that's going to affect them too much, honestly, but I do know that little storyline from Adam Rittenberg where he's talking about how they got a notice of alleged violations. So that may put a little damper. I don't think it's going to put a damper in 2023. And if Michigan wins it all, I don't think you're going to see them having to vacate it. But I do think that something's going to be up. I mean, they'll probably pay a fine, but that's it.
Yeah, for sure. Just want to get that out of the way because we don't want to take away from this game. This is going to be a great game no matter who wins, and whoever wins is the best football team. But let's talk about Michigan and how they got here, Jackson. So at the beginning of the year, their non-conference schedule,
That's pitiful.
it's pitiful to be nice. UNLV's looking like their best win out of that. And then you kind of go down the row and you're like, Rutgers, they're a nice bowl team. Nebraska, we thought was going to make bowl eligibility, but then they lost it at the end. They returned to Scott Frost, Nebraska. Poor Nebraska fans. How do y'all suffer through that? But then you got Minnesota, and then the pitiful Indiana. Then you have Michigan State, who they're just as big a mess. And they spanked them, and then Purdue, and then Penn State, Maryland, and then Ohio State. And obviously, Maryland was the week before rivalry week. A lot of things go on. It's one of those games that are trap games. Me and Jackson, we discussed it on our Saturday night recaps that we do during the season, talking about you can't put much stock into it because it is before rivalry week. Teams tend to play up to Michigan, Ohio State, try to catch them sleeping. But Jackson, just talk about Michigan and their early half of their schedule. Do you think this schedule that they have before they got to Penn State, do you think that hurts them in a way, not being as battle tested as maybe, say, Alabama, their opponent?
I don't think it hurts them as much because they did win the Big Ten. They did beat Ohio State, which I think really helped them get into the playoffs. Because if they didn't beat Ohio State, they were screwed. I mean, they basically needed to go unbeaten. And how they did without Harbaugh was the test. I mean, how they did against Penn State right then and there without Harbaugh. How they did against the Ohio State without Coach Harbaugh. It makes me wonder if Sharon Moore is going to be the next Ryan Day. Will he be leaving for better pastures, or is he going to sit and wait for Harbaugh to leave for the NFL or retire at Michigan to take over as the next head coach? That's my question for the future, but I think that win over UNLV. Let's talk about that for a bit. Now, UNLV, it looked like another dominating victory. But you see right there where they were tied for a spot in the Mount West title game, but unfortunately, they lost to Boise State and they lost to San Jose State on rivalry week. But ever since they lost to Michigan, they basically, with the exception against Fresno State, San Jose State, Boise State, they basically beat everyone on that schedule. I mean, they had that big win over Vandy. I mean, Vandy's a big win for UNLV. But the fact that UNLV had a 9-win season looks great right there. I mean, what an amazing turnaround job by Barry Odom. And I'll tell you who it helped make look good. It made the Michigan Wolverines look good. But we look at, well, and then there's Bowling Green. I mean, they were kind of a Jekyll and Hyde team. I mean, one week they did all right against Georgia Tech, but then next thing we knew, they weren't doing so hot against anybody else.
Yeah, that is for sure. But Jackson, there is something to be said that this could affect Michigan because Jackson, if forget the conference for just a second. When you don't schedule people out of non-conference and then you play someone like an Alabama in these scenarios, it really shows what kind of team you've got because you haven't been tested yet. Other than Ohio State, they haven't been tested really. You can make that argument.
You don't think
I
Penn
feel like
State was a test?
I think it was a test, Jackson, in the fact that Jim Harbaugh wasn't there. If he was there, Jackson, I feel like that game could have gotten out of hand. I feel like Michigan and their emotions maybe got the best of them that day. And Penn State, don't get me wrong, they had a fantastic defense, but Michigan's defense was smothering that offense. If Michigan had Jim Harbaugh, there was a possibility that game could have gotten a little ugly, and Penn State might not have lost by as much as they did. Would you agree, or do you think that doesn't play a role?
I don't think it played a role too much. I mean, I think they were going to be fine with Coach Harbaugh or with Coach Moore. I mean, they're fine either way. But, yeah, well, unfortunately, that Michigan State win, it isn't an impressive win. Purdue's not an impressive win. Indiana sure isn't an impressive win. Minnesota looked impressive for a while, especially when Minnesota upset Iowa. But then Minnesota let that Iowa game go to their head. Rutgers looked impressive until the month of November. Nebraska looked like an impressive win until November.
Yeah, it's one of those schedules, Jackson, where if they didn't win out, like if they didn't go unbeaten, they might have not made the playoffs. Would that have been fair to say?
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, had they lost one of their games, they'd have been in trouble.
Yeah, that's definitely a big talking point. But Jackson, they're number one. They went unbeaten. And I will say this before we head to Alabama. Before we head to Bama, Michigan, they're a team that against the weaker opponents, they dominated, did what they were supposed to do. But when they got against some of those teams that were on their level, they were in a rock fight. So that could help them in that sense that the Bama, who gets tested, they're in a rock fight with them. But as for Michigan overall, I would say right now, Jackson, if this is where it ends, I would say Michigan had a great season. Would you agree with that?
I would think so. However, they unfortunately would garner the reputation that they cannot get it done in the big games in the playoffs. That's going to be the problem because 2021, we saw they got routed by Georgia. I mean, everybody was too impressed with them basically taking back control of the Big Ten, which nobody should be upset about 2021. 2022, they should have beaten TCU, but they didn't. And now this year, we're going to see the question. Can Michigan win a big game in the postseason? And if they lose this game, If they lose this game, they will have the reputation of the LA Dodgers, the Milwaukee Bucks, and sorry to throw this name out to you, Dallas Cowboys, and a few other teams like Purdue basketball. So
Mm-hmm.
that's gonna
Yes, for
be,
sure, Jay.
yeah. I mean those are gonna be
Ye-
the teams that are on that list, right? Oh, did I forget to mention the LA Clippers? They would be the college football equivalent of the LA Clippers. But let's look at some of their stats. I mean, the passing yards, 73rd in the nation. They need to get a little higher. But JJ McCarthy's been pretty good. He's been pretty good. The
Mm-hmm.
run the, ru-
A
the
100%.
rushing game I'm surprised isn't higher. I mean, it's 60th in the nation. What's behind that,
True.
man? You think they're just kind of
Man,
saving it up for the postseason?
well, Jackson, and if you look at the schedule, they played a lot of weaker teams to start, so maybe they pulled their starters out early, and they weren't. Maybe that's why the stats don't look as bulked as maybe these other three teams that we're going to look at. They were like,
Oh yeah.
we're up 30-0. Let's go on and pull them.
Yeah, and I see that the defense is really good, but I couldn't help but notice that they do not have any penalties whatsoever. They're second in the nation in fewest penalties per game. They don't mess around.
Yes, but Jackson, I know we're talking about Michigan here, but let's talk about the team that no one ever questions when it comes to the playoffs and championships, and that is the Alabama Crimson Tide, who went
Oh,
12-1, went 12-1. No, excuse me, went 12-1 and won the SEC over the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, Jackson, you're obviously an Alabama fan, and you've watched them pretty much your whole life, including this year. Excuse me. And you've seen Alabama do some incredible things in your time. But where does this Bama team rank to you all time? Because this hasn't been one of Nick Saban's best teams, but they're winning these games and they're to this point. So where do they rank for you in terms of Alabama's great teams before we get into the
unfortunately,
schedule?
it doesn't get up there with 2011, 2009, 2012, 2015, 2017 for me. But
That's fair. I mean, that's fair. They definitely have some of their own issues that they need to fix that they did fix. And Jackson, first week of the season, Bama took care of business. Jalen Milroe looked like a Heisman contender. And then came the Texas game, which, Jackson, I know we'll get to Texas, and we found out Texas was actually back, and that Texas is actually good to great. But Jackson, then you see the South Florida game, and that was a struggle win,
oh god.
big time. Now, I'll ask you this, Jackson. Do you think that there's ever, do you think that was on Jalen Milroe? That he was as bad as everyone was saying he was? Or
No.
do you think that was just more of he ran into a really good opponent and then against South Florida, maybe the weather hindered him. And then Nick Saban kind of said, you know what? To get everyone to be quiet about him, let's put these other two in to show them that Milroe is the better quarterback. Just take me through your process, those first three games.
I think he was bringing the other two in to prove that Milroe was better. And secondly, that weather, oh my God, that played a factor. I mean, I've seen Alabama in my lifetime have to get through some bad weather, especially on old highlight videos like 1966 against Tennessee. But Yeah, that's another time for another day. Um, that South Florida game, they brought their A game against Alabama, and I mean that those penalties, those are what killed us. Throughout the first half of the season. You look back at Texas; those were one of the things that cost us against Texas. Those penalties. The South Florida game, oh my God, that was another factor right there. Texas A&M, the penalties almost cost us that game because you look here and it's a 26-20 victory. It should have been much higher, especially when we had the blocked field goal return. You would think it would have been much higher due to that, but there's a holding call. But I will tell you, though, guess who basically told Nick Saban it's okay to go back to being fiery, Nick Saban? Miss Terry. She was like, yeah, you got to get back to being angry, coach. You got to get back to being angry, coach. And you see right there, he lit a fire into Alabama, especially in the battle against Tennessee in the second half. Where it was a 20-7 lead. But then Alabama comes back and scores 27 unanswered points against the Volunteers. Then we go up against
Mm-hmm.
LSU, and we basically just had a good one against Jaden Daniels. But, oh, man, Kentucky. I mean, we smacked them around. Of course, we were going to smack down Chattanooga, which, I mean, I don't even want to get into that Chattanooga game. But the Iron Bowl, we got lucky. If you look back on, After Dark the week before the Iron Bowl, the day after Alabama beat Chattanooga, I said Auburn may have lost to New Mexico State. Yes. But nobody brings their A game against New Mexico State. Everybody brings their A game against the Alabama Crimson Tide. They did, and we almost lost. And when you look back, you see that fantastic finish from Jalen Milroe and Isaiah Bond on 4th and goal. Fantastic finish from
Isaiah
them.
Bond in the back of the end zone. Bond.
Bond.
But yeah,
Isaiah
that was
Bond.
definitely that was definitely Jackson. Just imagine if Bama doesn't get that. Bama's not
True.
here right now. Even if they
Oh,
beat Georgia, more than likely they're not here. Which we'll get to
oh yeah.
Georgia and all the circumstances surrounding it in just a second. But I do want to mention some of the games up top. Tennessee, that was a great win by Alabama, especially because a lot of people thought Tennessee could beat Alabama 2 years in a row, including me. I had faith in Joe Milton and that offense, but it turns out Tennessee was not as good as I thought, or a lot of people thought, especially in Gainesville. Don't even get us started on that. Don't even get us started. But Kentucky, a lot of Kentucky fans had hype after they beat Florida, and then Georgia kind of whipped some sense into them, and then certain Kentucky fans were saying they were going to beat Alabama. Alabama's washed, and then Alabama's whipped them as well. But Jackson, what I find interesting, you look at that Arkansas game, that was a little concerning at the time. 24-21. What went wrong that day? Because we come to find out Arkansas was not a very good team this year. And looking back at it now, we are seeing that Alabama almost lost that game too. Jackson, what do you think went wrong in that game? Because they could have easily had their second loss right there.
Yeah, I mean that was not good against Arkansas. Like I thought we were gonna have a better showing than we did in the second half, but the first half we looked a lot better. But again, we basically just hurt ourselves with some of those penalties in that game. We got lucky against them, but it shouldn't have come down to that for sure.
Yeah. And like you said, the great win over Texas A&M. And then obviously the Texas game, touch on that real quick. Jackson, I think a lot of people thought Alabama had caught a break in 2019, if you remember. No, 2022, excuse me. My pardon. Thought they got lucky that, maybe Bryce Young's shin should have been down. Texas should have been up this. And a lot of people had a sense that Alabama may have gotten lucky and that this year Texas was out to get them. And Jackson, what were your thoughts going into that game? Did you ever think that Bama would get beat by 10 points at home against Texas? Did that ever even cross your mind? Because
I didn't.
I'm sure as a Bama fan, you've seen a lot of games in your lifetime, but I'll let you go ahead on that.
Well, when I look back at the Alabama Texas game, I mean, if there's going to be somebody that was going to beat Alabama, it'd be the Texas Longhorns, especially after the fact that Quinn Ewers in Texas, had Quinn Ewers not been hurt in 2022, I think they would have beaten Alabama in Austin. But I think what also motivated Texas in a way were some of the Bama players doing the horns down business. They weren't too happy about that, I bet. And it was just not.
Yeah. And then Nick Saban got on him and said, "Don't do that stupid crap." Which you don't do that. You don't poke the bear. But Jackson, I think unfortunately we have to get to this because this is where the controversy starts for Alabama and their season. Because they're playing Georgia in the SEC championship game. This is probably the biggest game of all of college football besides the Natty and the playoffs. But we see on the other side of the spectrum, and this is important to know because Florida State is playing my Louisville Cardinals for the ACC championship. And Alabama took care of business, did what they were supposed to do. They beat Georgia when a lot of people thought Georgia was going to go unbeaten. And then it brought up questions of, Florida State just winning, you're in, right? And then it comes in that, you need some style points. Run up the score a little bit. Now, I'll let Jackson take us through this experience through the Bama lenses. But Jackson, when you saw that Alabama got in over Florida State, even after such a great victory, do you think that there is a little dark cloud over Bama? Because a lot of Florida State fans are mad at you all because of Greg Sankey and his SEC lobbying.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching College Game Day where Sankey was basically lobbying for two SEC teams, or basically to make sure an SEC team was getting in regardless of the result. And I'm like, wait a minute. Game hasn't been played yet. But I thought it was going to be, Florida State getting in, but either Texas is left out or Alabama gets left out. But I mean, because I thought they would be leaving Texas out, but they didn't. I mean, I'm happy that Bama's getting a shot at revenge, depending on how we do against the Rose Bowl, against Michigan, and depending how Texas does against Washington. I guess we'll wait and see. I mean, I'm happy we may get a shot revenge, but I didn't want it like this. I didn't want it to come at the expense of Florida State getting screwed up. And, I had a couple of episodes of the Jacksonian with Richie Barnes, the co-host of Double Fries No Slaw, and George Georgitis, the co-host of the Renegade Report, where I was basically like, look, I'm happy Bama's in, but I didn't want it to be like this.
Yeah,
and they were like,
it's one of those
we don't
things.
blame Bama fans. That like Florida State fans, they've made it clear they don't blame Bama Nation. They blame the lobbying of Sankey. They blame the NC State AD, and they blame ESPN, which I can't say I can blame them because I don't.
And which Jackson, not to get too clouded over this, because I do want to mention that fantastic victory over Georgia, because a
Oh
lot of
Lord, that
Georgia fans were thought the Bulldogs were going to make history and three-peat, and Bama denied their request to that. We'll get to that because we have to mention that because that's such a great win and should be recognized. But I do have to also mention this too, Jackson. It's very interesting that how did Greg Sankey know that? Why was he lobbying for two teams? Did he already know the outcome? I mean, like, that's just one of those that are very interesting. And number two is, Jackson, this whole argument of the four best or four deserving, that gets under my
yeah.
skin a little bit because they're saying they put Alabama in because this is the four best, this is the best playoffs. Well, then what did you do in years past with like TCU and Cincinnati and those type teams? Was TCU one of the four best last year, Jackson?
I would say they were.
Really? Okay. Now, Jackson, a lot of people would say Bama is far and away better than TCU.
I mean, Bama would
TCU.
have beaten them. Don't get me wrong. Bama would have beaten TCU, but they were one of the foremost deserving and one of the four best teams in the top four.
Like what I want to know, Jackson, is I just want consistency out of this committee. I have no problem with them putting Bama in if they want to use the argument for best, but I just want consistency out of them. If we're going by the scale of four best, do that every year. If we're going by deserving, do that every year. I just want consistency. How do you feel on that, Jackson?
Same. I mean, I'd like to see some consistency, but it's just one opinion here one year and one opinion here the next year.
Mm-hmm. But Jackson, we do have to mention before you get on with the stats and talk about Bama in their stats. Let's talk about that Georgia game because this was one of the biggest games of the college football season, like I mentioned before. And Alabama, arguably was probably the best matchup for Georgia. Georgia had ran through a lot of their opponents, and everyone knew it was going to be Bama, Georgia, in Atlanta more than likely. And it was. And Jackson, you stopped the quest of Georgia's three-peat. Talk to me about how Bama consistently finds ways to do this. Just when people think that someone's ready to take over Bama's throne, Nick Saban always takes it back. Just talk to me about that. Like how Georgia fans might have jumped the gun on taking over Bama's throne. And just talk about this great win and how you got to this point off of a season where wasn't the best of seasons, but it was a great road to get there.
A lot of people forget about how Alabama does as an underdog, which is rare. When Bama's an underdog, they always thrive as the dog. And they basically proved it against the Georgia Bulldogs in the SEC title game. People forget Kirby Smart actually has a losing record against Nick Saban. There's a lot of people that forget that, but he could not get it done against Saban for the longest time until the 2021 Natty. Now, Kirby's got one win, but I think he will get more wins against Saban at some point. And, he's basically proven himself. But Coach Saban, man, he showed that, hey, Bama's still the king. Don't forget it.
That is true. That is true. But you look at some of Alabama's statistics. The penalties have gone down, from where they were in the beginning of the season. Alabama, I'll let Jackson take it over from here, Jackson. Talk about some of Bama's statisticals and talk about how you've seen some of this growth in your team over the weeks and weeks in.
We're 23rd in passing yards allowed, but we are 60th in the passing game on offense. In the points allowed per game, we are 17th in the nation. So that we have to get those numbers up big time. But the red zone defense needs to get higher. It's 50th in the nation. The red zone offense is 7th in the nation. That's pretty good against a team, especially against a team like Michigan coming up. So we got to get that going. We straightened up real quick on the penalties. You do not see that many penalties on Bama these days. So that we don't have any more penalties anytime soon. I mean, we got some, but not as much. We're 46 in rushing yards per game. We're tied 47th. That's not bad, but it's not good either. But we look at the running game on defense, it's 29th in the nation. So basically, if you want to get at Alabama, all you got to do is utilize Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. Bam.
True.
And we also
I mean,
have to
that's gonna be a
protect
big
our
factor.
QB.
That's gonna be a big factor, Jackson. I don't think Michigan is gonna have a field day with their passing, especially with Kool-Aid McKinstry back there. He's an all-pro, all-American corner. I think he's gonna be a high draft pick if he decides to go and when he goes. So I think Michigan's going to have to rely on that run game. But one thing that Alabama always preaches is you got to win in the trenches first. And like you said, Jackson, to your point, they got to keep J.J. McCarthy upright if they want any shot to win this game. But with all that being said, Jackson, I'll let you pick on this game first. First, Jackson, who are you predicting to win this game? And give me your X factor for this game, a player that you feel could change this game.
Well, I think that Blake Corum can change the game. I think that Jace McClellan can change the game as well. But I think Rico Wilson will definitely have to step up. And I think Jermaine Burton will definitely be making sure he has to step up as well. What that O-line of Alabama needs to do is protect Jalen Milroe. You do that, you're good to go. But in all honesty, I believe this game is going to end in a 31-28 victory for the Alabama Crimson Tide.
What a shocker. The Alabama man picks Alabama. Who could have seen that coming? Oh my gosh, breaking news. But in all seriousness, though, that's a good prediction, Jackson. That's a good prediction. I will say the biggest thing for me is I think Kool-Aid McKinstry is going to be the biggest key in this game because Roman Wilson he's going to have to stay on Roman Wilson and make sure that J.J. McCarthy doesn't get it to his favorite target. Bama's going to have to win in the trenches early, and Michigan's O-line is going to have to do what it's done all year and prevent J.J. McCarthy from going to the ground. And Jalen Milroe can't turn the ball over, and he's got to use his legs. But with all that being said, I am going to pick Alabama 34-20 over the Michigan Wolverines. I'm going 34-20 Bama. I think they win in dominant fashion, and Bama proves why they are the standard still.
True. But we definitely are going to be
Jackson,
moving. Go ahead.
But Jackson, introduce us to our next game, good buddy.
We got ourselves the 2024 edition of the Sugar Bowl between the Texas Longhorns and the Washington Huskies. My friends, that is going to be a great game. And it's going to be a shootout, too, between Quinn Ewers and Michael Penix Jr. That's going to be a tremendous QB battle. And I will tell you, though, Steve Sarkisian has a tremendous backstory. Before he was the head coach of Texas, he coached at USC, and unfortunately, his tenure at USC ended badly because he had a bad addiction to alcohol. But Coach Saban straightened that up real quick, I'm sure. But before he was the USC head coach, he did coach under Pete Carroll at one point, and he left to become the Nets head coach of Washington in 2009. Now, back in 2009, Washington was coming off a winless 0-12 season with Tyrone Willingham. They were like, we got to make this guy go. But in the third game of 2009, in Sark's first year, Washington did the unexpected, which was beat USC. That was pretty big at the time. And then we saw Sark leading Washington to 4 straight bowl games for the Nets' 4 seasons. It was tremendous, I'll tell you. It was a great one. I was shocked when he got hired by Texas, honestly, at the time. And I doubted him. I didn't think he could get it done. I was like, you fire Tom Herman, you think you're going to do better than Sark? Well, Sark proved me wrong. I mean, that first year was a disaster. But, 2022, they finished the season in the Alamo Bowl. But that third season has been a breakout. Oh, my God.
Mm-hmm.
What a tremendous breakout year. I mean, that game against Alabama, that was big right there. I mean, Quinn Ewers, he has been the key to this. He was the key right there. You want to beat Alabama? Make sure you got some good quarterback play.
In Jackson, they went 12-1. They went 12-1, and they won the Big 12, which was big time for Texas, because we had a little discussion on our recap show on Saturday nights that we do during the season, that me and you had an argument or a discussion of, is Texas truly back? Are they truly back? And you believed in them heavily. You said, this Texas team is different. This Texas team has shown me something. You don't go into Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama by 10 points if you're just going to blow it. And I said, I don't know. No, Jackson. Texas is Texas. They're going to do Texas things. They're going to blow it eventually. And what happened? They lost to Oklahoma, and then it kind of was like, okay, now Texas is starting to maybe show their colors. But what does Texas do? They keep on winning and winning. But they also have some close calls against TCU and Iowa State. But they eventually were like, pounded Texas Tech into the ground, beat up on Ollie Gordon and Oklahoma State, and won the Big 12 in their final year. And Jackson, it's been an incredible year for Texas. They're 12-1, riding high. Jackson, just talk. I know you said you didn't believe in Sarkisian. I don't think a lot of us did, because Texas fans can be impatient at times. We all know that. And we were thinking, he'll get fired if he goes 8-4 again, 9-3. He might get fired again just because of who Texas is and what their reputation is. But that never happened. And here they are, Jackson. They're playing in the Sugar Bowl with a chance to go play for the Natty. But Jackson, just talk about this for a minute. After the Alabama win, did you ever think that Texas could reach this height? Or did you think New Year's 6 maybe win the Big 12? They're not quite a playoff team yet. Did you ever see Texas as a playoff team after that game?
Not in the preseason, but after they played Alabama, I was like, okay, they are a playoff team. They showed me. But after the Red River rivalry, I thought they would have a shot at revenge against Oklahoma, but they'll get their shot next year. Oklahoma, if Texas was to beat Washington, Oklahoma could say, yay, we beat a playoff team. We beat a national title team.
Yeah, that's very true. I will say, though, Jackson, as we look down through this schedule, I will have to say, though, Jackson, is it very concerning that Texas is playing close with a lot of bad teams? I mean, they almost lost to Houston. They almost lost to TCU. Iowa State gave them a fit. I mean, is that concerning at all to you, Jackson? I mean, if it's one performance, it's like, okay, maybe a bad day. But they had two or three in there. Was that concerning to you, Jackson?
Well, when you go to Ames, Iowa, because let's not forget the performance against Houston, TCU, and Iowa State, those were road environments. The road environments kind of scared them a little bit, but the home environments on like how they did against defending Big 12 champ Kansas State at the time. That was a tremendous game right then and there. You know,
Yeah,
they fought
Jackson.
big time. But don't forget to mention that Wyoming game where it was 10-10 tie going into the fourth quarter, but then Texas rattled off 21 straight points to end the game.
Yeah, 100% agree. But Jackson, you look at a team like Kansas that a lot of people had high aspirations on, especially you. Look what they did to them after Kansas got off to such a great start. Texas whooped them into the ground. But I will say, Jackson, on that K State game, I feel like Kansas State could have won that game, but they made some bad play calling that kind of bailed Texas out. I'm not trying to make excuses. It's a great win, like you said. But Jackson, would you have gone for it in that situation if you're Kansas State? 4th and 3, and only needing a field goal to tie in overtime? I mean, would you have done that?
I don't blame them for wanting to go for the win. I mean, I just don't. But I know you have to go for a field goal sometimes.
I mean, Jackson's one of those things we're looking back at it now as a bad call, but if they get it, not only does Texas season change, but we're also looking at Kansas State as a brilliant as a brilliant win for them and brilliant play call. So it's kind of double-edged sword. So maybe I could cut them some slack, but it's definitely one of those games Texas, I think, survived. They learned their lesson. Don't play with fire, or you're gonna get burned, as they say, for sure. But then Jackson, let's talk about the Big 12 championship game before we get into their statistics of the year. You know, they're playing Oklahoma State, who has the leading rusher in college football in touchdowns, and Ollie Gordon, one of the
Oh,
best
yeah.
running backs in all of college sports. Jackson, just take me through what you were thinking about in that game. Were you thinking that Oklahoma State ever had a shot, or was this the best matchup Texas could have gotten on their way to the playoffs?
I think this was definitely the best matchup they could have gotten in the playoffs. Unfortunately, had Oklahoma not lost to Oklahoma State or Kansas, we would have seen a Texas Oklahoma rematch in the Big 12 title game. But Texas showing us what they could do against Oklahoma State, that was basically a playoff clincher right there. That basically clinched that spot.
100% true. And Jackson, I know we love those statistics, so break down the statistics for us, shall you? Shall you, good buddy? Take us through what Texas has done on offense and defense and highlight some of their big time key playmakers.
Well, you know, they're 19th in the nation in passing yards per game. They are 24th in rushing yards per game, tied 16th in points per game, and 13th in points allowed per game. So that defense can step up when they need to. They are tied third in the red zone defense. But we see the red zone offense needs to really get better. I believe it's tied 89th in the nation. That's bad right there. It's up there with Kentucky, Nevada, and UTEP. So they have to get better in the red zone against Washington. So that's what they got to do. But unfortunately, they don't seem to be as disciplined as like Michigan in the penalties per game. So that is something they're going to have to get better at. They are tied 98th in penalties per game. That's going to be a killer right there, especially against Washington. But we'll get to Washington here in a little bit. I don't think they should be bragging either.
But yeah, those are some interesting statistics, Jackson. And I'm glad you brought up Washington. Washington, their opponent in the All-State Sugar Bowl, undefeated, 13-0, the Pac-12 champions. And may I add, Jackson, they are the last ever Pac-12 champions. No other team in Pac-12 history can ever say that, can ever take that away from Washington. And Kalen DeBoer won Coach of the Year. Congratulations to Coach Boer on a fantastic season and most certainly deserve it. And congratulations to Michael Penix on finishing second in the Heisman voting. Well deserved, and go Huskies to all the Husky fans out there watching. What a fantastic season. But Jackson, we do have to mention, I know you like to mention this a lot, their non-con schedule was not that good either. And Jackson, I know we have conversations about this a lot, but Jackson, take us through what you thought of their non-con schedule.
Oh, at the time, I did not like, the Michigan State game because, Michigan State got worse. Boise State, they were not the team that Washington scheduled years and years ago. However, Boise State did win the Mountain West. So I will say that win looks better for Washington. And the fact that Washington beat them 56-19, that looks tremendous right there. At the time, I didn't think Boise State could win the Mountain West. I didn't think they were going to come back and suddenly come out of nowhere with an interim head coach, but they did. I see that defense allowed 32 points against Cal. That was a bad look right there. And a little while ago, you mentioned something about Texas close calls. But let's not forget the Washington close calls. Good grief. The win against Arizona, nobody thought Arizona would be the magnificent 9-win team that they are now on September 30th. They didn't watch Washington, Arizona thinking, oh, Arizona can rattle off 6 straight wins. Nobody did. They looked terrible against Arizona State with a 15-7 victory. But they had a great game against the Oregon Donald Ducks, against Bo Nix. And I will say some of the play calling by Oregon, in a way, kind of helped out Washington.
Yeah, Jackson, as you're going along here, I'm kind of seeing a lot of similarities in Texas and Washington as they go through the season. Plenty of close calls and some questionable play calling by other teams. It's almost, Jackson, like they're paralleling one another. Because, Jackson, the Arizona State game, let's not forget, was at home. And that, Jackson, if you're playing a team like Arizona State 15-7, and you're only winning 15-7 at home, that makes you question a lot of things, right? At least if you look at Alabama, the 17-3 victory over South Florida, at least they could say that was on the road. At least Bama fans and Bama could say that we went at South Florida. At least we could say that was on the road. It happens. But Washington had a close call at home. If Oregon hadn't made those few bad decisions, who knows? And then you look through, Jackson. They beat USC 52-42. And I don't know if that says more about USC's bad defense or Washington's explosive offense, but they also gave up 42 as well. So what does that say about their defense?
True.
And then you got Utah, which that was a dogfight. And then Oregon State in the rain. And then the Apple Cup, Washington State was playing for bowl eligibility, and Washington went down, drive the field, kicked the game-winning field goal. Roman Adunze Great player, could have won the Bolitnikov. Great wide receiver, made a fantastic 4th-and-1 conversion. And then the rematch that everyone thought Oregon was going to win, Washington was like, not so fast. So they've had a pretty interesting season, to say the least, Jackson. But that USC game, Jackson, is it concerning that they gave up 42 points to USC, even with Caleb Williams?
Well, I mean, both their defenses were terrible. Unfortunately, Washington has not had a good defense. It's going to be their undoing if they lose at any point in the playoffs. I mean, the red zone defense I see is tied 71st. You can't be having those kind of stats. And points allowed per game are 50th in the nation. So that was not good. That USC game, I mean, it was a shootout between Caleb Williams and Michael Penix. So it didn't surprise me a bit that it was a shootout.
Yeah, and then, Jackson, does it surprise you at all that the Utah game was as close as it was, even without Cam Rising? Or do you think Utah is just that good of a team that maybe a lot of people underestimate their skills to keep it close?
I think people underestimated Utah big time. Because it's like people forget that Utah's the 2-time conference champs at the time. They were the defending conference champs of the Pac-12. So they're a tough cookie. That's not a team whose bad side I want to be on. But Washington was able to pull it out. But then you got Oregon State. They almost lost that one, but they didn't. But Washington State put quite a scare onto the Huskies in the 2023 edition of the Apple Cup. So, I mean, that was pretty big there. Then you look at the Pac-12 title game. Tremendous game right there. It was a tremendous game between Bo Nix and Michael Penix. So, we saw Penix and Bo Nix just going at it. And we saw Dylan Johnson making some plays. We saw
Yeah,
McMillan
Jackson.
and Rome Dungy. Let's not forget about him.
Yeah, Jackson, that Washington running game really took over late and won them this game big time. And that's going to be one of the keys for Washington. Can they take over the game in the trenches against Texas? But you look at their statistics, they are number 1 in pass yards per game. Number 1. So Texas secondary is going to have to deal with that passing offense. But Jackson, they're 100 in rushing yards per game. So Texas, who we're talking about, they are very good in the trenches, are definitely going to try to slow down the run, especially since Washington is 100th, almost not very good. But they do show sparks of a great running game. But Jackson, if you want to take away the rest of the statistics, go for it. I thought I'd just point those two out because they're very interesting to look at.
Well, Texas will have to step up in the passing game on defense. I mean, they are 94th in passing yards allowed per game. That's a bad look right there. I mean, people want to talk about Washington's defense. Shoot, that passing defense needs to step it up. So far, I'm not seeing it for Texas. I just don't see how they can get it done.
Yeah. And Jackson, Washington is 10th in points per game. They're top 10 in the nation. So Texas, they may be in a race, as we like to call it, a shootout. So they better be prepared to bring their offense as well. Well, and they are 50, and it's one of those things, Jackson. If Washington could get to 30, it may be lights out for the Horns. But go ahead.
Well, the scoring defense, Texas is 13th in points allowed per game, as we know. But Washington is not very good, unfortunately, on the defense. They'll have to really step it up against Texas.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'm ready to make my prediction, Jackson. If you are, I think I have my winner and my keys to this game. I'll start us out. I think one of the biggest keys is, can Washington test the Texas secondary? Michael Penix, can they test secondary? Can Texas get to Michael Penix, put some pressure on him, and can Texas slow down the running game and not let it get going in spurts? And Quentin Ewers, if he's on and healthy, Texas passing game could be one of the most dangerous things out there, especially with Xavier Worthy and Mitchell Adon from the former Georgia transfer. And Texas running game will be without Jonathan Brooks. That'll be a big hit. But Texas, they're also going to establish a ground game to force the Huskies to think a little bit on defense. But those are some of my keys to this game. But Jackson, I know you're going to like this prediction because I've got a Texas 35-32 victory over the Huskies, and it's going to be Alabama and Texas, the rematch. And Jackson's smiling because he hopes that my prediction will come true, just so he can see his Tide get the revenge and win it. But the question is, does Jackson think that's going to happen? Take it away, my friend.
I'm afraid it won't, unfortunately. I'm afraid I'm going to be disappointed on this. I think it's going to be a Washington 38-35 victory. We're going to have quite an amazing shootout between Quinn Ewers and Michael Penix.
Yeah, it should be fun for sure. But that was our playoff predictions. I have Alabama, Texas in the national championship, and Jackson has Alabama, Washington. It should be interesting. Who knows? It could be Michigan, Washington, or it could be Michigan, Texas, or it could be Alabama, Texas, or Alabama, Washington. There's so many scenarios, so many great things we will definitely see on Monday, January 1st, New Year's Day. But
There we go.
don't forget to enjoy the holidays, spend it with your family, and watch some great college football. But as soon as these playoff games are over, we will be back to preview the national championship game. Whoever's in it, we will preview that, break it down, and then we will kind of do a little recap of the whole bowl season, talk about some of the better games. We'll even talk about some of the worst games. Iowa, Tennessee, I'm talking to you. And we'll even talk about these playoff games and these championships all in a nutshell. But Jackson, let the people know before we get out of here where they can find you and what you got coming up on your end of the field.
Well, they can find me on YouTube at Jackson Johnson 979, where I have some of these videos and some of my instant reaction videos to some of the events going on in college football and NFL, and all sorts of stuff, plus my Jacksonian episodes. But you can also find some of my Jacksonian episodes on Twitter at Jackson 909960335. And you can also see some of my announcements on the Jacksonian as well on Twitter. Same with Instagram and threads.net at Jackson Johnson 543908, where on all of these platforms, I just kind of run my mouth about what's going on in college football, NFL, and pop culture, and some of the other sports like college basketball, NBA, MLB. I'm not exactly an expert on a few of these others as I am in college football or NFL, but I do my best to give my best takes on there. But I do also go on some rants on the overtime system on the NFL every now and again. So you can check out my little ranting and raving on Twitter. But where can everybody find you, Austin? Like, what you got going on, my good man?
Well, you can find me at youtube.com at Sports Talk with Austin 2002. You can find me on Twitter at AW19802639. Find me over there where I kind of post a little bit of everything, post my videos. Of course, I post a lot of Dallas Cowboys content, especially when they win, you know, and here at Sports Talk with Austin, I will have bowl previews coming out of past videos me and Jackson have done, like today, the Wasabi Fenway Bowl and the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl. I released those today. Tomorrow, I'll be planning on releasing the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl, and I will plan on releasing some more down the road. And I did a special interview on the Duke's Mayo Bowl with Jeffrey from Only Talk Sports. Look for that in the future before December 27th, before the Mayo Bowl is played. And I can't wait for these playoff games, Jackson. But more importantly, if people want to help us grow and help us become the new college game day, they need to like, they need to comment, they need to subscribe, they need to click on the notification bells, tell us which games they're looking forward to, which games they're not looking forward to, and tell us their winners and their predictions and all that good stuff. But don't you worry, friends. We will be back later on. Don't worry. This is not the last time you're going to see us. Don't cry. Put the handkerchief away. We'll be back. But until next time, this has been Sports Talk with Austin.
And Jackson Johnson.
Of the Jacksonian. Go Cards, everybody. Beat USC.